Okay. I think we have critical mass here, so we'll get started. I'd like to welcome everybody to the U54 Partnership Research Design and Analysis Core Seminar. I think all of you know that I'm Carol Lowenstein, Director of the RDAC, and I'll be moderating today's seminar. We hold a number of these seminars throughout the academic year. We aim to highlight topics that are methods focused, as well as provide tools that will assist in the research being conducted throughout the partnership. If you haven't had a chance already, please go to the partnership website and take a look at past seminars. There's the slides, the recordings are there, and the folks who gave them usually on their last slide have a contact slide. Feel free to reach out to people. They're more than willing to help with a study, answer questions, etc. I'll monitor the chat today, and if questions come up, I'll pause intermittently, and people can ask those, and then we'll have time at the end for questions also. So we're pleased to have Dr. Manan Nayak with us today to talk about the role of cannabis in oncology. Dr. Nayak is a research scientist with a dual appointment at the Cantor Center for Research in Nursing and Patient Care and the Department of Psychosocial Oncology and Palliative Care here at Dana-Farber. She is a 2024 fellow, NIH Fellow in Artificial Intelligence Machine Learning Consortium to Advance Health Equity and Research Diversity, and National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences Fellow, a 2023-24 American Psychosocial Oncology Society Health Equity Scholar, and a 2022 New York Academy of Medicine Fellow. Dr. Nayak holds master's and doctoral degrees in sociology from the University of Massachusetts, Boston, with a concentration in medical sociology and health disparities. With expertise in qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods approaches, she is dedicated to reducing health disparities through the use of the social determinants of health framework, exploring associations between social gradients and health disparities, both at the macro and micro levels, in order to reduce symptom burden and improve quality of life in individuals with cancer. Her program of research has two parallel tracks with a focus on tobacco and cannabis consumption by adults with cancer. She strives to develop sustainable and equitable interventions through the use of innovative technologies and methodologies, which we will hear about today. Many of us have had the pleasure of working with Manan over the years and have watched her progress in her career to where she is today as a research scientist, now pursuing her own work. So I will let you take it away.
Great, thank you. All right, let me see if I can do the sharing properly first. How is that looking?
Yep, that looks good.
Okay, great. And then, awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to present some of the work today. My mentor, Ilana Braun, who is a senior psychiatrist at Dana-Farber, her and I have been doing work in cannabis at the intersection of oncology for the past 8 to 10 years. As Carol said, my name is Manan Nayak. I'm a social scientist with a research focus on health disparities and substance use, and my talk is titled "The Role of Cannabis in Oncology." And slide, okay. All right, so today I will review a little bit about defining medicinal cannabis, discuss the legal landscape, and spend some time remaining presenting findings from the 3 studies that really kind of built off of one another, where we talk to oncologists, adults with cancer, and also dispensary personnel. And so each research study kind of led us to the next key or the puzzle piece that we were trying to, as we are trying to understand how cannabis is utilized in the oncologic setting. And then throughout the presentation, I'll discuss some of the approaches for cannabis care. So in terms of the evolution of the US legal climate regarding cannabis, no talk for cannabis is complete until we talk about the legality surrounding it. So there are two main takeaways, and I will demonstrate them as I continue on with the presentation. Is the first that federal and state cannabis laws are frequently in conflict with one another. And this divide influences cannabis research, clinical care, and leaving medicinal cannabis in a conundrum. And I will go into more about this. And so just to give you kind of an overview of what I mean by having discrepancies in the legalities. As you can see in this slide, the blue is the federal laws and the orange is the state laws. And so early 20th century or so, cannabis was permissible, and it was patented to be analgesic, had sedative effects. However, around 1937, driven a lot by the anti-immigrant sentiments and the timber interests, several states started to restrict or ban cannabis. And in 1930s, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics chief even asserted that cannabis could lead to insanity and criminality. And as you can see, after that, both the federal and the state laws began to restrict the permissiveness of cannabis. However, around 1960s, 1970s, specifically in 1968, there was some utility of cannabis being observed. And so the federal government actually designated a single cannabis grower at University of Massachusetts to kind of allow researchers to conduct cannabis research by using that single product from that one farm. However, in the 1970s, what was even more important, besides having the some flexibility to do some research, the cannabis was actually labeled as a controlled substance in 1970, and it was scheduled as cannabis Schedule 1. And just to give you a context, Schedule 1 means that cannabis has no medical use. The risk profile is unacceptable for use under the medical supervision, and it's considered to have high risk for abuse. And to just put this all in context, cocaine is scheduled 2 compared to cannabis. So, some discrepancies there. So around 1996, things kind of started to shift, both socially and politically. And in 1996, spurred by activists, a ballot initiative took place where California was the first state to legalize medicinal cannabis. And then after that, you can kind of see that many other states kind of led their own ballot initiatives and began to legalize cannabis. And you can start to see a sharp difference between states having their own cannabis laws compared to federal. Federal is still lagging behind. And so kind of to put all of this in perspective, cannabis is still federally illegal. However, individual states have passed their own medical cannabis laws. So 38 states have comprehensive medicinal cannabis laws. 24 of these states also have adult use cannabis laws. So you can, as long as you are 21 years of age or older, you can go to a dispensary and have access to cannabis products. 10 states also have very limited medicinal cannabis laws. So what this really means is that they are specifying that as long as the products that are available are very high in cannabidiol or CBD and low in THC, you may have access to those products. And 2 states have no public access to cannabis as of now, which is Idaho and Nebraska. And so what do I really mean when I am talking about medicinal cannabis? Well, medicinal cannabis is any cannabis product used for medicinal intent, often with a physician recommendation, but it's not always the case, as I kind of alluded to earlier, that if you consume cannabis or obtain it from a adult use dispensary, you do not need to have a physician recommendation. Cannabis itself contains hundreds of ingredients, including cannabinoids such as THC, CBD, phenols, and terpenes. And oftentimes, the 2 major ingredients that we've talked a lot about, or many of us may know about, is the THC, which is known to cause the high feeling or the euphoria, whereas the CBD is exactly the opposite and has a counteractive and can have some anxiolytic effect as well. So in other words, if you take too much THC, you can counter it by counter its effect through taking some CBD. So in terms of comprehensive medicinal cannabis laws, like why are they there? One, it's to protect users from criminal penalties. It allows access to products. It also allows a variety of strains and products, and I'll talk more about that as I continue. And it also allows for non-oral routes of administration. These comprehensive medicinal cannabis laws' general structure is that you must have an identifying or a qualifying condition that you must meet in order to get the cannabis card. It allows recommendations, not prescriptions, so that's important distinction there. It stipulates permissible amounts, so specifying how much can a person get with their card. It also establishes state registries and authorizes dispensary systems. So when we look at qualifying conditions, they vary from state to state, but the 2 major ones that stand out are HIV/AIDS and cancer. And this is important because all states with any cannabis laws allow for cannabis use if you meet either of these 2 conditions. Also, literature and some data out there shows that at least 1 in 4 or 1 in 3 individuals with cancer turns to cannabis. So it's an important and growing area of research. And I also talked a little bit about the difference between prescription and recommendation. And so when we're talking about medicinal cannabis, it's always referred to as having a medicinal cannabis recommendation. And here you can kind of see the difference between prescription versus recommendation, where with the card, if you're consuming cannabis, you need to have a qualifying condition, quantity, and how long you can get it. So to kind of put this all in context, the quantity limit for Massachusetts is about 10 ounces for a 60-day supply. So equivalent to having a roughly 500 marijuana cigarettes for that 60-day supply. Now, here's a general overview of the modes of administration, benefits and risks associated with those. As you can see, the delivery of is significantly varying. So you can smoke it, tap it, vaporize it, vape it, sublingual, oral, topical, suppositories, you name it. And it seems that every time I'm doing any more of these qualitative interviews, I'm learning about more and more ways people are consuming cannabis products. However, the way you consume it or the way it's delivered will depend on how quickly the effect or the onset of the cannabis product is experienced. So if you smoke it, you're more likely to have an immediate onset. But of course, then there are risks associated with it, such as carcinogenicity carcinogens and toxins. And given the cancer context, of course, we would want others from not smoking cannabis products. But as you learn more through some of the work we've done, that it certainly varies significantly. Now, here's another way to kind of look at access to medicinal cannabinoids. There's three big types as I kind of, and I will focus mostly on the bottom half of this table, but just to give you a little bit of an overview, there is some synthetic cannabinoids that are out there that are FDA approved and can be obtained through our standard pharmacies. These are consumed as an oral route and are known for use for chemo-induced nausea and vomiting and anorexia caused through HIV and AIDS. And then there's the second half of, let me see if I can use my, so second half of this table, it does talk a little bit about the herbal cannabis extracts. So this is products derived from the actual cannabis plant, whereas the prior ones were synthetics. And these, there are two products on the market currently. The cannabidiol, which is CBD, is FDA approved for rare pediatric epilepsies and is available in the US, whereas the second one is available outside of the US and not currently approved in the United States. And then we go to the unrefined cannabis products. So these are all the different hundreds of ingredients that we can get from the plant, can be consumed in all various forms that I kind of already mentioned, and its utility can be varying, as you will learn a little bit more about. And they're often dispensed at the cannabis dispensaries. So who and what are the typical medicinal cannabis dispensaries? Well, they're non-pharmaceutical preparation of the product. So chemical purity standards don't, that does not ensure stability, safety, and efficacy of the product. Even though they are highly regulated in many ways, where the states may have specific stipulations of, the types of products and quality that they must meet certain lab tested products in order to sell these products at the dispensaries, they're often unregulated in important ways. First, the ratio of active ingredients can vary significantly. Potencies also vary. Types of products that you can get are also varying from one dispensary to another. And to kind of put this in context, if you bought a bottle of gummies, cannabis gummies, there is no guarantee that if the label reads that there's a certain percentage of ratio in each of the gummies, that you will get exactly that in all the gummies in the bottle. And also in most states, non-medical intermediaries advise on products, delivery methods, and dosing. And this was an important piece because we wanted to actually understand who are these folks that are giving advice on cannabis therapeutics. And so the other complicated process or the problem with cannabis or clinical trial work around cannabis is that it's still Schedule I designation, so accessing the federal funding is a tricky one, although recently there have been a lot of funding opportunities that are becoming available. Sourcing the study drug itself is very complicated. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, there's only a single farm which allows for us to have a government authorized cannabis plants for research purposes. But the farm doesn't reflect the wide variety of products and cannabinoid formulations that the patients can currently obtain through all these commercial dispensaries that are out there. They're certainly negotiating of a lot of red tape. And as researchers, we have to manage our personal, financial, and criminal liability. So the stack of things that you have to get through to get the Schedule I designation to do clinical trials is very, very tricky. And so, but I do want to talk a little bit about some of the clinical trial works that has happened in the past 2 decades. I won't go into detail of all of these studies, but these are clinical trials of full spectrum herbal cannabis in the oncologic populations. And you can see that there are a variety of drug targets or specific symptoms that these clinical trials examined. And as you can see, the chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting and pain are the only ones that seem to show some evidence of cannabis having a positive effect on those two symptoms. And interestingly, when you kind of pull apart, what kind of modes of administration these clinical trials have examined in their studies, you could see that only oral and sublinguals are the only two things that we have any kind of clinical trial evidence on. So all those other modes of administration still are things for us to continue to learn and investigate about. And so the next kind of set of my presentation is going to be focused a lot more on some of the work that we've been doing here at Dana-Farber. And so in about 2016, and before I kind of even talk a little bit about some of the work we've done, I kind of wanted to say two important pieces. One, that given all the challenges that I just talked about, we've kind of engaged in a lot of socio-behavioral research. But also importantly, we're doing this research without any agenda. So we're neither for or against cannabis. We just simply want to systematically study cannabis consumption in the oncologic space. And so to do that, one of the first things we decided to do was to kind of engage key informants to really understand what was happening and if there was even any belief of medical utility for cannabis. And so our first study engaged thought leaders at the intersection of oncology and cannabis to understand what their thoughts and perceptions were about cannabis. We recruited these key informants from around the country with a special emphasis on recruiting individuals that were both for and those against cannabis. We wanted to make sure that it was a representative sample and we heard as many perspectives as possible. And so on the right-hand side, you can kind of see the characteristics of the sample of 15 key informants that we talked to. Generally males, mean age 52, across various specialties and practices. And importantly, we wanted to also engage experts from across the country. This is important because as you saw earlier, that a lot of different variations in state laws exist, and we wanted to kind of understand whether that kind of informed their beliefs about cannabis's utility. And so here's some results that were key themes that came out of these qualitative interviews. So all key informants, including the naysayers, believe that cannabis did have some medicinal potential. And the emergent themes were the strongest for cancer-related indications were the fact that cannabis can ameliorate cancer-related nausea and vomiting and pain. And they also believed that the risk profile was better for cannabis than opioids or benzodiazepines. However, one of the biggest cautions or things that they discussed about was the uncertain purity and production standards. So like over-the-counter supplements, there's no guarantee the purity standards. The main message, however, from this qualitative work was that more clinical research was needed to understand cannabis's potential. And so armed with this qualitative data, we gathered a multidisciplinary team and used gold standard methodology for survey design to quantitatively assess beliefs and practices and knowledge of oncologists. And so that kind of led us to conducting a survey in 2018. And so this was a nationally representative sample of oncologists where we had about N of 400 with a 63% response rate. The survey took place between 2016 and 2017, and here's some selected demographics of the sample, where 66% were male, about half were non-Hispanic whites, 53% had a medical school appointment, and the years in profession varied, and 57% practiced in states with a medical marijuana laws. So what are some of the key findings from this national survey of oncologists? So as you can see that 80% of the oncologists discussed cannabis clinically with their patients. However, 46% recommended it clinically as well. But as you can see that only 30% indicated feeling sufficiently informed or knowledgeable to make these clinical recommendations. And not shown in this data are the fact that about 67% of the oncologists also felt that it was helpful as an adjunct to standard pain management as well. And so it is what is problematic is that although half are making these recommendations for cannabis clinically, the knowledge gap seems to be significant. In the survey, we also kind of inquired about medical oncologist preferences on cannabis strains. And as you can see, about 66% are reported having no preference or didn't know what kind of strains were preferred for their patients to use. So a lot of information or the knowledge seems to be lagging behind. And so what are some of the key takeaways from the survey from the oncologists? Well, first, there is a discrepancy between knowledge and practice, and more cannabis therapeutic education is needed. However, these findings also left us wondering on the experiences and perceptions of individuals with cancer consuming cannabis. And in particular, we wanted to understand the end user experience. And so therefore that has led us to designing a qualitative study where we interviewed adults with cancer. And these semi-structured interviews with cancer patients were conducted across, again, 8 geographically and culturally diverse states. And we did these interviews between April 2017 and March 2019. And again, here's some selected demographics. So the median age was about 57 years, predominantly female, and we're regionally diverse as well. And what was interesting is that even though we had consented participants to do these interviews for about 45 minutes, people wanted to stay on and share their experiences and give extensive and rich feedback. And here's some key things from this data that we've collected. So most received their cannabis certification from professionals that were new to their care. So typically through brief transactional encounters. So these were, they were getting their access to medical cannabis cards from other than those that were their oncology teams. Everyone that we interviewed reported disclosing consuming medical cannabis, but reported receiving little to no guidance from their actual oncology teams. And so as a result, cancer patients reported relying on personal experimentation and dispensary personnel to get medical guidance on how to consume, what to consume, when to consume the products. Cancer patients used cannabis for symptom management, not just for chemo-induced nausea and vomiting and pain, but more for all different types of things, including sleep, anxiety, general well-being, appetite stimulation, and the list kind of just went on. And what was even more concerning from this data was that half of the participants reported using cannabis as cancer-directed therapy. So sometimes in lieu of traditional treatment. So they reported foregoing their traditional cancer treatments because they were strong believers of cannabis helping them. And they reported using wide variety of products. So the chart or the table I showed earlier, all different ways and products are available for them to use. And so when we, and here's some quotes to kind of give you a little bit more context of the key themes that I kind of just talked a little bit about. So when we asked patients about describing their experiencing seeing a doctor who certifies them for a medical cannabis card, one person reported the guy wore a stethoscope, never used it, nor did he examine me in any way, nor did he ask any real penetrating questions. I went in, gave him my 200. I spoke to the doctor who said, "What ails you?" "Cancer ails me." "Okay, sign on the dotted line." And I was out the door, helping me figure out what I needed and how to go about the process of self-medicating. None of that was provided by the doctor. And this was a common sentiment across the participants that we spoke to. So then we kind of queried them about, what were their immediate medical team's responses. And a participant said, most doctors, you mentioned cannabis, they shut right up. They don't say 2 words to you. They don't give you an opinion, nothing. They just shut right up. Another quote kind of also demonstrates the medical team's response were they weren't confident or comfortable recommending different types or different dosages to me, given that they didn't know enough about it and there wasn't enough research. They said that they didn't believe it was harmful, but didn't fully understand how helpful it was either. So this kind of demonstrated a little bit more of the transparency between the patients and their oncologic team about cannabis discussion. Another person, interestingly, said, I vaped right in front of my doctor the other day, and he didn't even know what I was doing. And so some of these experiences of lack of clinical guidance kind of led patients to do personal experimentation. And here's another quote that kind of, demonstrates this. I'm documenting quantities. I'm looking at how I feel. I'm documenting how long it takes before I feel the pain relief or before I nod out and go to sleep. How do I feel when I wake up? I have a table. I'm building up, okay? How much THC is in this brand, this strain that I just purchased, and then is it an indica or is it sativa, and put that check mark in the table. So really, the onus ends up being on the patient to not only do trial and error and personal experimentation to figure out whether the product that they've purchased from the dispensary is going to help them alleviate some of the symptoms that they may be targeting. And so the other piece that came through from this qualitative work was the fact that cannabis dispensary personnel were getting guidance or giving guidance, medical guidance on cannabis use. And so when we asked them about it, a participant described, sometimes I go in and I ask the dispensary employee additional questions like, one of the things I've been having a problem with is muscle spasms. I mean, they have a better feel for the reaction that the other buyers have had while they've gone through there. And so really kind of talking a little bit about, relying on the dispensary personnel to give them guidance. So what are some of the kind of key takeaways from this qualitative work? And also kind of looking back at the survey data from the oncologist and looking at the two to say, what are both of these studies kind of trying to tell us? And the key takeaways were that both of these studies suggest that there's a communication gap between oncologists and adults with cancer. For example, we know that some clinical trial data supports cannabis use for chemo-induced nausea and vomiting and pain, but our participants reported using cannabis for various different symptom management, including, as you saw, muscle spasms, sleep, appetite stimulation, and onwards. And we also realized from these qualitative interviews that patients are really relying on the dispensary personnel to give them medical advice. And so the next natural step in our work was to talk to the dispensary personnel. Who are they? What are they, basing their clinical knowledge on, and how are they guiding the patients on what products and modes of administration and all the different information about cannabis products. And so in 2022, we again took an approach to do a qualitative interview study. And this was important because when we looked into the literature, the dispensary personnel voices were silent. So nobody had really looked at who are they, what are they doing, and what kind of advice are they offering. And so we felt that doing a qualitative approach was an important one, where we can kind of let the participants guide us in what they're hearing, what their experiences are based on, rather than going with the survey. And so here is a little bit of the demographics. So we did these semi-structured interviews again in 2020 and 2021. We conducted these interviews across 13 states with dispensary personnel employed both at either medical cannabis dispensaries only, adult use dispensaries, or dispensaries that provided both types of products. And in order to be eligible for the study, dispensary personnel had to be either client-facing, so the people that are giving their clients advice, or those that were in managerial roles, to really understand what are their kind of metrics that the managers are using when they're hiring dispensary personnel. And so as you can see, some of the key descriptives are that the average age was 40, slightly more females, 81% non-Hispanic whites. Majority personally consumed cannabis and worked full-time at these facilities. And years in the cannabis field range significantly, with an average of about 5.5 years or so in the field. And so what are some of the kind of key takeaways or the themes that came out from doing these interviews with dispensary personnel was that talking to them was interesting, because they suggested the on-the-job training for cannabis therapeutics was weak. Specifically, dispensary personnel talked a lot about being committed to their profession and being resourceful in their pursuit of cannabis knowledge. And some exemplars were, they self-financed learning in off hours. So really working off hours to read books or any other scientific articles or anything else that they could find to kind of educate them about cannabis therapeutics. They also sampled the dispensary products to gain familiarities, to try to understand, the effects that the particular product may have and how quickly or how long it takes for it to take effect. And also kind of exchanging information with peers, so talking to one another during work hours to kind of learn from each other. However, cannabis dispensaries, the participants kind of also talked at length about cannabis dispensaries often citing sales skills over cannabis therapeutics knowledge when the hiring was kind of done, and also reported having uneven baseline levels of knowledge. So someone that's brand new to the industry can also be at the front desk selling products, where you may also have people that have been in the industry for extensive periods of time. And so the baseline knowledge was significantly varying. And they also talked a lot about workplace training generally being weak and unstandardized. And I will kind of next demonstrate some of these quotes to illustrate what I mean by this. And so when we asked about hiring practices, we learned that dispensaries favored sales acumen over cannabis knowledge. And so here's a quote that says, So they're mostly looking for customer service and somewhat of a background as far as cannabis goes. But honestly, I would say that customer service is probably one of the top things or qualifications that we look for when hiring, since it's technically like a medical retail environment. And this is a quote from a manager that's hiring dispensary personnel. And here's another quote about on-the-job workplace training. You got thrown to the wolves. They hope that you knew some of the information about the product that they carried. And if you didn't, well, you're going to learn as you go. So this is a client-facing dispensary personnel experience. And this was consistent throughout all the interviews that we did. Here's another quote about workplace training. We give them very low-level training, rudimentary training, and then it's kind of information sharing from there. Again, another perspective from a managerial position. And so having this uneven level of workplace training, as I kind of talked about, a lot of self-learning or self-directed learning is taking place. So when I got into the industry, it was very apparent that anybody who wants to learn or teach anything has to self-educate 100% of the time. And so taken together from just some of the interviews from the dispensary personnel, we learned that although cannabis dispensary personnel had strong convictions of medicinal potential for cannabis, the dispensaries were favoring sales acumen over cannabis therapeutics. And so this study really identified the need for standardized cannabis therapeutics training, including programs for client-facing dispensary personnel. There are now some universities that are providing cannabis certifications, but it's not consistent and across the board. And also, more importantly, for us as the medical community to really think about taking a more active role in cannabis advising. The data from this study also led us to question whether relying on cannabis dispensary personnel to advise on products and modes of administration and etc. are the right thing for us to do. And so although a lot more work remains on this front, there are two additional takeaways that I would like to conclude with this talk are, one, that there's significant political interest currently for rescheduling cannabis and reclassifying it to Schedule 3. And if that actually happens, it would be a very important aspect in the research environment, because we could do a lot more clinical trials and really understand and gather data on whether there is a positive or a negative effect of cannabis on some of the various different symptoms that the patients reported using to treat or address some of the symptoms that they're experiencing from cancer. And finally, a lot of the work that we've been doing over the decade, almost all of our papers have, and many of the other researchers in this field have kind of advocated for the need to have some sort of clinical guidelines for not only just the oncologist, but for us to have something that we can kind of say, what can we hang our hat on in terms of this, the variety of ways in which cannabis is consumed. And I'm happy to report that ASCO, as of March of this year, just released their first cannabis and cannabinoids guidelines. And so here, I've pulled some excerpts. I'm not going to go into detail with all of them, but really the main point is that American Society of Clinical Oncology recognizes that cannabis has medical utility, but it's very narrow focused. And they're really saying that cannabis can be used as an adjunct alongside with standard chemo-induced nausea and vomiting therapies. However, the bigger picture is here that they are encouraging a discussion between patients and their oncology teams to have a non-judgmental dialogue between patients and providers on cannabis consumptions and what may or may not be right for them. And so I think that this is a step forward in some of the work that we have been doing. So with that, I just want to say thank you to everybody, all my mentors, and the opportunity to speak today. I have some references, and if we have some time, I would love to also show a video that we have been putting together based on some of the work that we've done, because we really recognize the importance to have not only education on the clinical front, but also patient education. And so anyways, I would love to show that video and get your thoughts about it, but I will pause here, and if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them or try to answer them.
Does anyone have any questions?
I actually have a question, and a comment. My first question is, years ago, there was a real issue with as I understand it, there's like one source, it's the University of Mississippi that provides all of the marijuana or cannabis for any sort of research, and there were significant problems with their supply. Has that continued to be true? And what is the sort of landscape in terms of where people are outsourcing their plants from for research?
Yeah, great question. So recently there have been other farms where you can get cannabis for clinical research. I believe a couple of years ago, Yale started to kind of circumvent a way to get the products that they can use for clinical trials. So it's not just Mississippi anymore, but that was kind of like where it started. And the problem with it was the products that they were growing. In fact, the DEA said, their products also have the same quality issues in terms of mold and other issues. And so it wasn't even good product to begin with. And then the strengths and everything else is so different compared to what's available at any of these dispensaries. And so, it's kind of doing research based on any of these single farms or any one place is kind of tricky, because different states have different product availability and strengths. And so how do we systematically understand this is a very complicated piece. But yeah, it was a good question. There are definitely more facilities coming out that you can source the product from. But as I said, because it's still a Schedule I, it's very, very complicated to even circumvent or get the products. And so, hopefully, if it gets rescheduled or reclassified, I think that will be a very good thing for science and understanding cannabis's utility.
So I had a quick question. So this goes back to the data set you're talking about, where you had talked with doctors and kind of assessed their confidence or their knowledge about cannabis and their recommendations. And one of the things that struck me as kind of interesting there was that it seemed like more doctors were recommending cannabis than reported feeling like they knew what was going on. So I'm just kind of curious to hear more about that. So are there doctors who are really just recommending it, even though they don't think they know much about it? Or was I misunderstanding those data and those percentages coming from different samples or something? Just be curious to hear more about that, because that kind of struck me as interesting.
Yeah, what you interpreted is exactly correct. It's the same sample, so the same oncology survey participants. And so, I think there's a little bit of a distinction. One, yes, they are recommending cannabis, but they didn't feel knowledgeable enough about making these recommendations, right? And so when we asked them about different symptoms and things like that, sure, knowing some of the clinical evidence that exists, they were like, sure, I know maybe it works for chemo-induced nausea and vomiting, maybe for pain, but maybe based on what I'm hearing from my patients, that it may be working for other things too. And so I think that there's that aspect of it, besides having these gold standard randomized clinical trials for us to hang our hats on. There's a lot of anecdotal information that may be causing them to have these conversations with their patients and maybe saying, yeah, I'll give it a try, you know, depending on where the person is in their diagnosis. And so, yeah, oncologists are making these recommendations, but when you actually ask them about how knowledgeable do you feel about different products, modes, and as I kind of showed in one of my slides, even talking about strains, they just don't know. And I think that is an important piece for us as researchers to kind of provide them with some of the either clinical guidelines so that they feel like they can have these conversations with their patients, and or continue to do more research that we can say, yeah, it sure works for other indications that we really just can't say for sure right now. Right.
So you had my curiosity piqued, and I kind of want to see this video.
I think Ijeoma, you have a question.
Hi, Manan. Great
there we go, yeah.
presentation.
Thank
Can you
you.
hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. I was wondering about, I know obviously you're doing all the foundational work to get this going, but I was really curious about pediatric oncology. As you know, that's the population that I work with. And during my clinical encounter, I've had a lot of parents who actually inquired about using some products to help with, symptom management. And I wonder, going forward with your work, if, this might be a group that you can look into just to see some way to give guidelines to parents about administering products safely. And also, I know obviously you've started done a lot of your work with physicians, but I would also plant the seed that advanced practice providers, since we have prescriptive authority, may also be, important part of the team that could, help with the knowledge and the teaching that may, need to happen in the clinical setting, so that, these products are administered safely. So I just wanted to say that, to say maybe that would be a group that you might think about in the future going forward.
Yeah, great thoughts. Actually, there's a lot of work being done. So our survey that we developed, it was kind of we were kind of early on in our cannabis work, and now that survey has been adapted, and similar findings or information is coming out where it's been, other fellows, nurses. So a lot of other cannabis researchers are exactly doing this, which is talking with other stakeholders. And I think it's so important because, nurses and other folks are definitely on the front lines, and they may be hearing a lot more about cannabis use. And so I think that's definitely a line of inquiry that is important. And we want to kind of continue with that as well. And I think the other comment or question that you had was about pediatrics. And I think that's, again, really important. But, just hopefully through this demonstration or this presentation, you just saw how complicated it is just to understand the legalities and administration within adults, that it's even that much more complicated, right? Because a lot of the state laws will say age 21 years and older to even get cannabis products, right? And so then how do we navigate the systems? And so I think there is, like you said, a lot of seminal work needs to be done with the pediatric populations. There is one product that I mentioned, cannabidiol, that is FDA approved for pediatric epilepsy. And we actually recently just did a randomized clinical trial to see whether CBD can help with anxiety among adults. But, again, I think a lot more work needs to be done within the pediatric population for sure. So, yeah, thank you for your comments. Great. Okay, let me see if we have 5 minutes. I think this would work in 5 minutes. I am very excited to show the video if it works, hopefully. Give me a second. My link is not working anymore. Sorry. I want to make sure I can optimize the volume. Can everyone see my screen, the YouTube?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
The Dana-Farber Cancer Institute believes in patient-centered care. We understand that cannabis can be part of the journey for people with cancer. We hope that this video will invite open discussion between you and your cancer care team. We also hope it will educate about the role of cannabis during cancer care.
Cannabis refers to a product made from the cannabis plant. Cannabis may also be called marijuana, medical marijuana, pot, weed, hemp, to name a few. It contains hundreds of ingredients, including cannabinoids, such as THC and CBD. THC causes a high feeling, while CBD does not. There are many types of cannabis products with different amounts of these active ingredients.
Cannabis comes in many different forms. You can use cannabis by inhaling smoke or vapor, by eating or drinking products made with cannabis, like baked goods, candies, and teas. You can use it topically by rubbing a cream or ointment on your skin.
At Dana-Farber, we advise patients based on science, and cannabis use is no different. So far, studies in humans have not shown cannabis to treat cancer itself. The best evidence for cannabis use during cancer is to treat nausea and vomiting from chemotherapy when other treatments don't work well enough. More research is being done to look into other possible benefits for people with cancer.
We always want to make sure you're informed of any possible risks during your treatment. Using cannabis may have some risks. It can interfere with some medicines, including cancer treatments. Cannabis could also have side effects, such as confusion, anxiety, and vomiting. These could affect your cancer treatment and your quality of life.
As a nurse practitioner, I'm often the first medical person patients speak to about the cannabis use. I appreciate being informed and included in the conversation.
You should talk with your cancer care team about where you get your cannabis, how often you use it, how you use it, why you use it, how it makes you feel, what types of cannabis you are using, importantly, the amount of THC and CBD that is in it, and how much it costs.
Medical cannabis is legal in some states, but not all. Cannabis is also legal in some states for adult non-medical use. If you decide to get cannabis this way, you should still talk with your cancer care team about using cannabis. It's important that they know of every medicine and supplement you are taking.
Remember, if you're thinking of using cannabis during cancer, your Dana-Farber team wants to be part of the conversation. They can advise you personally or help you think through where to get quality advice based on science.
So yeah, that was one of the videos that we kind of pulled together based on a lot of the data from all the studies that I kind of presented today. And as you see, we're trying to engage as many different stakeholders as possible to kind of, you know, share this important work and important information for patients, and trying to, you know, address some of the myths or anything else that may be happening. And so, yeah, we're in the process of trying to make more videos that kind of go a little bit into more depth with other questions or issues that the patients and their care teams have raised. And so, yeah, more work to be done.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for that presentation. It was wonderful, and I'm really glad you showed the video at the end. As you were presenting, it's obvious that there's a lot of just like, I can't deal with it, not gonna touch it. But it looks like Dana-Farber is not gonna be in that position and that we're stepping up and admitting that we don't know everything. But we are taking a scientific approach, and I think it's wonderful to see your work showcased in that way.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So,
Great work. Thanks so much, Manan, for coming.
yeah, thanks, Anna, for the suggestion, and, you know, I think it worked out well, so.
Yeah,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. We'll be sort of on a break until September, and then we'll pick up with the seminar series again.
Awesome.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Carol. Thanks all.
Bye-bye.